Some mistakes don't end with an apology. They end with an entire system asking how it ever let them happen. The quiet suburban street had barely awakened beneath the pale gold light of an early Virginia morning. Freshly cut lawns glistened with dew, sprinklers ticked rhythmically across neat front yards, and the familiar sound of children laughing somewhere down the block drifted through the crisp air. It looked like the kind of neighborhood where nothing extraordinary ever happened, where neighbors waved over white picket fences and every driveway told the story of another ordinary American family beginning another ordinary day. Then a black and white patrol cruiser rolled slowly around the corner, breaking the calm with the low hum of its engine before stopping sharply in front of a brick home tucked beneath two towering oak trees. Officer Marcus Hale stepped out, adjusting the badge on his chest as he scanned the property with narrowed eyes. Across the driveway, a tall black man in a simple navy sweatshirt and faded blue jeans was locking his front door while holding a travel coffee mug in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. Nothing about him suggested panic. Nothing about him suggested urgency. He simply looked like someone heading to work. Marcus watched him for only a few seconds before making up his mind. In his eyes, the picture was already complete. He strode across the driveway with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own judgment. "You," he called firmly. "Stay exactly where you are." The man stopped, turned calmly, and met the officer's gaze without raising his voice or taking a single step backward. "Good morning, officer," he said politely. "Is there a problem?" Marcus ignored the greeting. Identification. The request echoed loudly enough that a woman watering flowers next door glanced over her shoulder. Another neighbor paused while walking a golden retriever. Curtains shifted ever so slightly as more eyes quietly gathered behind windows. The stranger reached slowly toward his back pocket. "My wallet is right here," he explained evenly. "I'll move carefully. Keep your hands where I can see them." "Marcus," interrupted, his tone hardening. The man's expression never changed. He simply raised both hands slightly away from his sides, still holding the coffee cup with one hand. "My name is Isaiah Brooks," he replied. "I live here." Marcus gave a short, skeptical laugh. "We'll see about that." The neighborhood grew quieter with every passing second. Even the birds seemed to disappear into the stillness. Isaiah looked toward his front porch for only a moment before returning his attention to the officer. There was no anger in his face, no fear, only an unusual patience that felt strangely out of place beneath the growing tension. "Officer," he said carefully, "if you'll allow me to explain, this can be resolved in less than a minute." Marcus stepped closer instead. "Save it." A teenager across the street quietly lifted a phone, recording without saying a word. Another neighbor whispered that the man had lived there for months. Marcus didn't seem interested in hearing any of it. His confidence only grew stronger as more people watched. Isaiah took one slow breath, his eyes briefly lifting toward the brightening morning sky before settling back on the officer. "I would strongly recommend verifying who I am before this goes any further," he said with remarkable composure. Marcus answered with a dismissive smile. "You're in no position to make recommendations." Marcus Hale glanced toward the gathering crowd, as though every curious face confirmed he had already made the correct decision. The quiet confidence he carried had been built over years of believing that hesitation was weakness, and he had no intention of showing any now. Isaiah Brooks remained exactly where he stood, his posture relaxed despite the growing attention surrounding him. His coffee had begun to cool in his hand, yet he never looked away from the officer. Across the street, more front doors opened. A retired schoolteacher stepped onto her porch with folded arms. A delivery driver slowed his van without turning off the engine. Parents walking their children toward the neighborhood bus stop quietly paused, sensing that something unusual was unfolding before them. Marcus extended his hand. "Set the briefcase on ground." Isaiah complied without argument, carefully placing the worn leather case beside his polished brown shoes. "Thank you," he answered calmly. "May I ask what this is about?" "You can ask questions later," Marcus replied. "Right now, you answer mine." Isaiah gave a respectful nod. "Very well. The exchange puzzled several neighbors. They expected frustration, perhaps an argument, but instead they watched a man who seemed almost unusually composed. It was as though he understood something no one else did. Marcus interpreted that calmness differently. To him, it looked rehearsed. "You said your name is Isaiah Brooks," he said while speaking into his shoulder radio. "That is correct. And you claim this house belongs to you." "It does." Marcus looked at the two-story brick home with carefully trimmed hedges and an American flag hanging neatly beside the front entrance. "Nice place," he remarked. "Expensive neighborhood." Isaiah simply answered, "It has been my home for several years." A faint vibration came from inside Isaiah's jacket pocket. His phone had begun ringing. Marcus immediately noticed it. "Do not touch it. I was not planning to," Isaiah replied. The ringing stopped after several seconds, only to begin again almost immediately. Another neighbor whispered that whoever was calling seemed persistent. Marcus frowned. "Busy morning?" Isaiah offered a small smile. "You could say that." The answer only seemed to irritate the officer further. "You think this is amusing?" "No, officer. I think misunderstandings become much more difficult when people stop listening." A young patrol officer arrived in a second cruiser and stepped out cautiously. His name tag read Ethan Miller. He looked from Marcus to Isaiah, then quietly scanned the growing crowd. "Everything all right?" he asked. Marcus answered before Isaiah could speak. "Routine investigation." Ethan studied Isaiah for a moment. Something about the man's face felt strangely familiar, although he could not place it. Before he could think further, the phone rang again. This time the vibration echoed clearly through the quiet morning air. Marcus stepped forward and held out his hand. "Give me the phone." Isaiah hesitated only long enough to speak one sentence. "Officer, I respectfully recommend that you allow me to answer this call." "That is not happening." Isaiah slowly removed the phone and placed it into Marcus's waiting hand without resistance. The screen illuminated for only an instant before Marcus turned it over, preventing anyone nearby from seeing the caller identification. Isaiah watched silently as the ringing stopped once more. He drew a slow breath and looked across the street where more neighbors had gathered, their expressions shifting from curiosity to quiet concern. Then, in the same calm voice he had used from the beginning, he said, "There are moments when one simple decision changes the course of an ordinary day. I sincerely hope this is not one of those moments." Isaiah Brooks lowered his eyes briefly toward the phone, now resting in Marcus Hale's hand, before looking back at the officer with the same steady composure that had unsettled everyone watching. He did not argue. He did not demand the device back. Instead, he quietly folded his hands in front of him as though patience itself had become his strongest response. Around them, whispers spread from one driveway to another. Some neighbors recognized Isaiah as the courteous man who greeted everyone during morning walks, who shoveled an elderly neighbor's sidewalk after winter storms, and who never missed the neighborhood association meetings. Yet none of them knew what was truly unfolding. Marcus noticed the murmurs and interpreted them as support for his authority rather than concern for the man standing before him. He looked toward Officer Ethan Miller. "Search the briefcase." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before kneeling beside the leather case. "Sir," he asked Isaiah politely, "do you have anything inside that I should know about before I open it?" Isaiah answered without hesitation. "Only documents for a meeting, a laptop, and a few personal items." Marcus folded his arms. "We will find out soon enough." Ethan carefully opened the briefcase. Inside were neatly organized folders, a tablet computer, several pens, reading glasses in a protective case, and a slim notebook with no visible markings. Everything appeared remarkably ordinary. Ethan flipped through one folder, expecting something suspicious, but instead found carefully prepared reports filled with charts, printed memoranda, and official correspondence. He looked back at Marcus. Nothing unusual so far. Marcus stepped closer and glanced inside himself. "Keep looking." Ethan continued examining the contents, while Isaiah remained completely still. The neighborhood had become unusually silent. Even those recording with their phones had stopped speaking, sensing that the calmness of the man in front of them somehow carried more weight than the confidence of the officer questioning him. One elderly neighbor finally spoke from across the street. "Officer, I have lived here for 20 years. That gentleman has always treated everyone with respect." Marcus barely acknowledged her. "Ma'am, please stay out of an active investigation." She nodded reluctantly, but remained where she stood. Ethan discovered a leather business card holder tucked inside one of the compartments. "There are identification cards in here," he said. Marcus reached over and took the holder before Ethan could examine it more closely. He glanced at the first card for barely a second, frowned, then slipped it back inside without showing anyone else. "Counterfeit cards are not difficult to make," he muttered. Isaiah spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. "If you would like verification, there are procedures available to you." Marcus answered sharply. "I decide the procedures." Another vibration echoed from the phone, still in Marcus's possession. This time the screen remained illuminated longer than before. Ethan instinctively glanced toward it and caught only a brief glimpse of an official-looking seal before Marcus turned the device face down once again. Ethan felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. He could not explain why, but every passing minute made the situation feel less routine and far more significant than anyone had expected. Isaiah noticed the young officer's uncertainty, but said nothing to encourage it. Instead, he looked calmly at Marcus and said, "Every public servant carries two responsibilities. One is enforcing the law. The other is protecting the trust that allows people to believe in it. I hope, for everyone's sake, those responsibilities remain together today." Marcus responded with a dismissive smile, convinced that the quiet man standing before him was simply trying to sound important. Yet standing only a few feet away, Officer Ethan Miller could no longer ignore the growing feeling that they were missing something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Officer Ethan Miller could not shake the uneasy feeling growing in the back of his mind. He quietly picked up the leather business card holder once more, hoping Marcus Hale would not object this time. Before he could open it, Marcus reached over and took it from his hands again. "I already looked," Marcus said firmly. "There is nothing in here that changes anything." Ethan hesitated. Would it hurt to verify the identification through dispatch? Marcus answered without looking at him. "Dispatch will hear from me when I am ready." Isaiah Brooks listened without interrupting. His expression remained composed, but there was now a hint of disappointment in his eyes, not because of what was happening to him, but because of how easily simple verification had been replaced by certainty. Another neighbor stepped forward from the sidewalk, holding a small package she had been carrying home. "Officer," she said politely, "I see Mr. Brooks almost every morning. He volunteers at the community food drive every month. There has to be some misunderstanding." Marcus offered a brief nod that sounded more like dismissal than appreciation. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I am handling this according to procedure." Isaiah glanced toward the woman and gave her a reassuring smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "Everything will become clear in time." Those simple words puzzled everyone nearby. Most people in his position would have argued, demanded answers, or shown visible frustration. Instead, Isaiah seemed almost certain that the truth required nothing more than patience. His confidence slowly began influencing the crowd. The whispered conversations changed. Instead of asking what the man had done, people began asking whether the officer had made a mistake. Marcus sensed the shift immediately. Determined to regain complete control, he picked up Isaiah's briefcase and closed it with a sharp snap. "You are coming with us." Isaiah looked directly at him. "May I secure my front door before we leave?" Marcus considered the request for only a moment before shaking his head. "No, we are finished here." Isaiah quietly removed a small house key from his pocket and held it up. "The door is already locked." His calm reply somehow made Marcus even more uncomfortable. Officer Ethan noticed something else. Parked neatly beside the garage was a dark gray sedan with government license plates. He had seen similar plates before during Joint Task Force training sessions, although he could not remember exactly where. Before he could study them further, Marcus called it back. "Ethan, stay focused." "Yes, sir." As Ethan returned, The phone in Marcus's pocket vibrated once again. This time it did not stop after a few seconds. It rang continuously, almost insistently, before falling silent. Only moments later it began again. Marcus sighed with obvious irritation and removed the phone just long enough to silence another incoming call without reading the screen. Ethan caught only a brief glimpse of several missed calls appearing one after another. Whoever was trying to reach Isaiah clearly refused to give up. Isaiah watched the phone disappear back into Marcus's pocket and quietly said, "Someone is attempting to prevent this misunderstanding from becoming much larger." Marcus laughed under his breath. "Or someone is trying to help you avoid responsibility." Isaiah slowly shook his head. "Responsibility has never been my concern today. Accuracy has." Those words lingered in the still morning air long after they were spoken. Even the neighbors who had never met Isaiah before found themselves wondering why a man facing such public embarrassment remained more concerned about accuracy than himself. Standing only a few feet away, Ethan felt the same question echo in his own mind, and for the first time that morning he began wondering whether the most important evidence had never been inside the briefcase at all, but inside the calls that no one had been willing to answer. Marcus Hale picked up the leather briefcase and walked toward the waiting patrol cruiser without looking back, fully expecting Isaiah Brooks to follow. Isaiah took one final glance at the quiet home behind him, then calmly stepped forward without resistance. The growing crowd instinctively moved aside, creating a narrow path across the driveway. Nobody spoke. The silence itself had become part of the story. Officer Ethan Miller opened the rear passenger door and waited. Before Isaiah entered the vehicle, he turned politely toward Marcus. "Officer, I have one more request." Marcus sighed impatiently. "You have already made enough requests. Please notify your supervisor before this situation progresses any further." Marcus answered with a confident smile that suggested he believed the outcome had already been decided. "My supervisor will receive a complete report after I finish doing my job." Isaiah nodded once. "I understand." He entered the cruiser without another word. As the door closed, another phone inside Marcus's pocket began vibrating again. This time it was immediately followed by the sharp tone of the patrol radio. Marcus pressed the radio microphone. "Unit 12, go ahead." Dispatch responded with unusual urgency. "Unit 12, please confirm the name of the individual involved in your current investigation." Marcus frowned. "Why?" There was a brief pause before dispatch replied. "We have received multiple inquiries requesting confirmation regarding an individual identified as Isaiah Brooks." Marcus looked through the rear window at Isaiah, who simply sat quietly with his hands resting comfortably in his lap. "The name is Isaiah Brooks," Marcus answered. "Stand by," dispatch replied. Several long seconds passed. Ethan glanced toward Marcus. "Should we wait?" Marcus shook his head. "No, we are leaving." Before dispatch could respond again, Marcus placed the radio volume lower and climbed into the driver's seat. Ethan hesitated before taking the passenger seat. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, neighbors continued watching until it disappeared around the corner. Inside the vehicle, nobody spoke for nearly 2 minutes. The only sounds came from the tires rolling over the pavement and the occasional crackle from the radio speaker. Isaiah remained remarkably calm, looking out the window as familiar streets slowly passed by. Ethan studied him through the rearview mirror. There was no resentment in his expression, only quiet reflection, as though he were thinking far beyond the events of that morning. The radio suddenly came alive again. "Unit 12, dispatch requesting immediate acknowledgement." Marcus answered with visible irritation. "Unit 12 receiving." Dispatch spoke carefully this time. "Captain Daniel Ross has requested that you contact him immediately before arriving at the station." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Tell the captain I will brief him when I get there." "Unit 12, the captain stated the call cannot wait." Marcus reached forward and muted the radio entirely. Ethan looked over in surprise. "Sir," the captain sounded serious. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. People become serious over routine matters all the time. Isaiah finally spoke from the back seat. His voice remained respectful and steady. "Officer Hale, There are moments when confidence serves a public servant well. There are also moments when verification serves everyone better. Marcus did not answer. He simply tightened his grip on the steering wheel and continued driving toward the station, unaware that several hundred miles away in Washington, conference rooms had already fallen silent. Secure telephones were ringing one after another, and more than one federal office had begun asking the same urgent question. Where was Director Isaiah Brooks, and why had nobody been able to reach him all morning? The patrol cruiser rolled into the station parking lot just as the morning sun climbed higher above the rooftops. Officers coming and going barely glanced at the vehicle, assuming it was another ordinary stop at the beginning of another ordinary shift. Marcus Hale stepped out first, carrying Isaiah Brooks's briefcase with the confidence of someone who believed every decision he had made would soon be justified. Ethan Miller quietly opened the rear door. Isaiah stepped onto the pavement with the same calm dignity he had maintained since leaving his home. He looked around the station for a brief moment, taking in the familiar symbols of public service before following the officers inside. The lobby buzzed with routine conversations, ringing telephones, and the steady rhythm of keyboards. Several officers noticed the visitor but quickly returned to their work. Marcus guided Isaiah toward an interview room. "Have a seat," he said. Isaiah complied without complaint. He placed his hands comfortably on the table and waited. Marcus set the briefcase in the corner of the room and closed the door behind him. Ethan remained outside, unable to ignore the growing uneasiness in his thoughts. Before he could say anything, Captain Daniel Ross emerged from his office holding a phone against his ear. His expression was far more serious than Ethan had ever seen. "Yes," the captain said quietly. "I understand. We are checking immediately." He lowered the phone and looked directly at Marcus. "I need to know exactly who is in that interview room." Marcus answered confidently, a man identifying himself as Isaiah Brooks. The captain's face tightened. "Did you verify his identity?" Marcus folded his arms. "We found identification that appeared questionable. I decided further investigation was necessary." Before the captain could respond, the station receptionist called from the front desk. "Captain, another call from Washington. They said it is urgent." The room grew noticeably quieter. Officers nearby began exchanging uncertain glances. Daniel accepted the call and listened without speaking for nearly 30 seconds. The color slowly drained from his face. "Yes," he finally replied. "He is here." He looked toward the closed interview room door before ending the call. Marcus noticed the change immediately. "What is going on?" Daniel answered carefully. "Washington wants to know why Mr. Brooks has not answered his phone all morning." Marcus shrugged. "His phone is in my possession." Ethan felt his stomach sink. The captain stared at Marcus for another long moment. "Who specifically is calling?" Marcus reached into his pocket and placed the phone on the front counter. For the first time since leaving the neighborhood, nobody stopped the screen from lighting up. Every missed call became visible at once. The display showed a long list of secure government numbers along with repeated calls from officials whose titles alone caused several officers to stop what they were doing. Ethan silently read one of the notifications before looking back at the captain with widened eyes. Daniel did not touch the phone immediately. Instead, he drew a slow breath and quietly instructed the receptionist, "Do not disconnect any incoming calls from Washington." Isaiah remained alone inside the interview room, completely unaware of the conversations unfolding just beyond the door, or perhaps perfectly aware and simply unwilling to rush them. He sat patiently, occasionally glancing toward the clock on the wall, as though he understood that truth rarely needed to raise its voice. Outside the room, the station's routine rhythm had completely changed. The ringing telephones no longer sounded ordinary. Every new call seemed to carry greater urgency than the one before it. Then, through the front windows, Ethan noticed something unusual. 3 black sport utility vehicles turned slowly into the station entrance one after another with remarkable precision. There were no flashing lights, no sirens, and no unnecessary attention. They simply arrived with quiet purpose, and somehow that silence carried far more authority than any noise ever could. The engines fell silent almost at the same moment. Every conversation inside the station seemed to fade as heads instinctively turned toward the front entrance. 3 black sport utility vehicles had stopped with perfect alignment outside the building. A 4th arrived only seconds later, followed by another unmarked sedan. No emergency lights flashed. No doors slammed in panic. Everything happened with deliberate precision, the kind that came only from people who never needed to announce their authority. Officer Ethan Miller watched through the glass as several men and women stepped out wearing dark business attire beneath neatly tailored jackets. Their identification credentials remained visible only long enough to reassure the uniformed officer stationed at the front desk. Captain Daniel Ross immediately walked toward the entrance, his expression shifting from concern to unmistakable recognition. Marcus Hale followed several steps behind, still convinced there had been some misunderstanding that could easily be explained. The station doors opened, and a woman with calm confidence entered first. She carried no sense of urgency because she did not need one. Her presence alone changed the atmosphere. She introduced herself quietly. Special Agent Rachel Collins. Captain Ross extended his hand. Captain Daniel Ross. Rachel returned the greeting with professional courtesy before asking a single question. Where is Director Isaiah Brooks? The room became completely still. Marcus frowned. Director? Rachel slowly turned toward him. Yes, Director Isaiah Brooks. Marcus gave a short, uncertain laugh. There must be some mistake. Rachel met his eyes without raising her voice. There is a mistake. That is why we are here. Another federal official stepped forward carrying a sealed folder. He placed it on the reception counter and opened it carefully. Inside were official appointment documents, government credentials, and recent photographs identifying Isaiah Brooks as the current director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Captain Ross looked at the documents only briefly before lowering his eyes. Ethan felt the uneasy suspicion that had followed him all morning become undeniable reality. Marcus remained motionless. Those documents could belong to anyone, he insisted, although his confidence no longer matched his words. Rachel calmly accepted the phone Marcus had taken earlier. The screen illuminated once again. She glanced at the missed calls before quietly placing it beside the folder. Those calls came from the office of the Attorney General, the Deputy Director, the Executive Assistant Director, and multiple secure federal offices attempting to locate Director Brooks before a scheduled national security briefing. No one spoke. Rachel continued with the same measured tone. When Director Brooks failed to arrive, every agency that expected him began searching for an explanation. Captain Ross closed his eyes briefly before asking the question he already feared he knew the answer to. Has he been in our interview room this entire time? Rachel nodded once. Yes. She looked toward the closed door. He has shown remarkable patience. Marcus stared at the floor for the first time that morning. The certainty that had guided every decision since arriving at Isaiah's home had quietly disappeared, replaced by the unmistakable realization that assumptions had carried consequences far beyond a routine encounter. Rachel walked calmly toward the interview room without waiting for anyone to escort her. She opened the door gently. Isaiah Brooks looked up from the table with the same composed expression he had worn since sunrise. A faint smile crossed his face as Rachel entered. Good morning, Director, she said respectfully. Isaiah returned the greeting with quiet warmth. Good morning, Rachel. It appears everyone has finally had an opportunity to verify the facts. Those simple words echoed through the hallway, far more powerfully than any raised voice ever could, and every officer standing within earshot understood that the most important lesson of the day had not come from authority itself, but from the discipline to seek the truth before reaching a conclusion. Isaiah Brooks rose from his chair as Rachel Collins entered the interview room, not with triumph, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted that the truth would eventually find its way into the room. Rachel handed him his phone with both hands. Director, I apologize for the delay. Isaiah accepted it with a grateful nod. Thank you, Rachel. The screen immediately filled with notifications from colleagues, senior officials, and family members who had been trying to reach him throughout the morning. He quickly typed a brief message confirming that he was safe before placing the phone back into his pocket. Outside the interview room, the atmosphere had changed completely. The conversations had stopped. Officers who had walked confidently through the station only. Minutes earlier now stood quietly, watching events unfold with thoughtful expressions. Captain Daniel Ross approached Isaiah first. "Director Brooks," he said sincerely, "on behalf of this department, I apologize for what has happened today." Isaiah met the captain's eyes and answered calmly, "Captain, accountability begins with acknowledging the facts. I appreciate that you are willing to do that." Marcus Hale remained several feet away, unable to find the certainty that had defined him all morning. Every decision now replayed in his mind from a completely different perspective. The unanswered phone calls, the patient explanations, the respectful requests for verification, and the quiet confidence of the man he had repeatedly dismissed all returned with uncomfortable clarity. Ethan Miller looked toward Marcus before speaking softly. "Sir, he asked us to verify everything from the beginning." Marcus lowered his head, but offered no response. Rachel Collins turned toward Captain Ross. "Director Brooks was expected at a national security briefing this morning. Multiple federal offices delayed scheduled discussions because nobody could determine why he had disappeared." The captain nodded solemnly. "We understand the seriousness of that." Rachel continued without accusation. "Our priority now is ensuring the director arrives safely and that every relevant fact regarding today's events is preserved through the appropriate administrative process." Captain Ross immediately instructed another supervisor to secure all body camera recordings, dispatch communications, and station security footage. The order was given professionally and without raised voices. No one argued. No one needed to. The procedures that existed to protect public trust were finally being followed. Isaiah quietly picked up his leather briefcase from the corner of the room and checked that everything remained inside. Nothing appeared disturbed beyond the inconvenience of the morning itself. Before leaving, he turned toward Marcus. For a brief moment, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Many expected anger. Others expected a lecture. Instead, Isaiah spoke with remarkable restraint. "Officer Hale, authority is one of the greatest responsibilities a person can receive. Every encounter offers an opportunity either to strengthen public confidence or weaken it. I hope today's experience reminds all of us that verification is never a sign of weakness. It is one of the strongest forms of professionalism." Marcus finally looked up. The confidence that had once filled his expression had been replaced by quiet reflection. "Director Brooks," he said carefully, "I should have listened before reaching conclusions." Isaiah gave a small nod. Listening is where good judgment begins. No one celebrated the moment. There was no applause and no dramatic exchange. There was only silence filled with understanding. As Isaiah walked beside Rachel Collins toward the station entrance, officers on both sides of the hallway instinctively stepped aside. They did not move because of rank alone. They moved because they had witnessed something far more lasting than authority. They had witnessed the difference between assuming who someone was and taking the time to discover the truth. Isaiah Brooks stepped through the front doors of the station into the bright morning sunlight, where the line of black sport utility vehicles waited quietly along the curb. The air felt different now, not because the weather had changed, but because the truth had finally reached everyone who needed to hear it. Rachel Collins opened the rear passenger door, but Isaiah paused for a moment and looked back at the building behind him. It was an ordinary police station, built to protect the community and uphold the law. He knew that one difficult morning would never define every officer inside those walls. Institutions earn trust through the choices people made every day, and those choices always began with character. Captain Daniel Ross joined him outside. "Director Brooks," he said, "today has reminded all of us that procedure only works when it is guided by fairness. We will fully cooperate with every review." Isaiah nodded respectfully. That commitment matters far more than any statement offered for appearances. Public trust is built through actions that people can see. Ethan Miller stepped forward next. His expression carried both relief and humility. "Director, thank you for remaining patient with us. I learned more this morning than I expected to learn in years." Isaiah smiled warmly. "Never stop asking one more question before reaching a conclusion. That habit will serve both you and the people you protect." Ethan nodded quietly, knowing those words would remain with him long after the day ended. A short distance away, Marcus Hale stood alone near the station entrance. No one surrounded him. No one argued with him. The confidence that had filled his voice only hours earlier had been replaced by thoughtful silence. Isaiah walked toward him before entering the waiting vehicle. Marcus looked up slowly. "Director Brooks," he said, "I cannot change what happened this morning." Isaiah answered gently, "None of us can change yesterday. We can only decide whether tomorrow looks different." Marcus took a slow breath. "Understand that now." Isaiah extended his hand, and after a brief moment of surprise, Marcus accepted it. The handshake lasted only a second, but every officer watching understood what it represented. Accountability did not require humiliation. Respect did not require agreement. Justice did not require revenge. As Isaiah entered the vehicle, the convoy quietly pulled away from the station without sirens or celebration. Inside the car, Rachel glanced toward him. "You missed the briefing." Isaiah looked out the window as neighborhoods, schools, and local businesses passed by. "Meetings can be rescheduled," he replied. "Opportunities to remind people why fairness matters cannot." Back at the station, officers gradually returned to their daily responsibilities, but the conversations sounded different now. More questions were asked. More facts were verified. More attention was given to listening before deciding. The events of one morning became a lesson shared throughout the department, not because of rank or headlines, but because everyone present had witnessed how quickly assumptions could replace judgment and how quietly truth could restore it. Long after the vehicles disappeared into traffic, the memory remained. People would remember the calm man who never raised his voice, the young officer who chose to keep thinking, the captain who accepted responsibility, and even the officer whose mistake became a turning point rather than the final chapter. Because in the end, a badge may grant authority, but only integrity earns respect. And while assumptions can travel faster than the truth always arrives with enough strength to stand on its own.